Hello, I'm Alex from Barefaced, and if you play guitar or bass, you probably find these things as annoying as I do, but also as essential as I do. So, I'm going to have a quick chat with you about cables. Well, I say quick, it depends how complicated it gets. So, cables. The first thing, the kettle lead. Does the rest of the world call it that, or is it just us in Britain who drink too much tea? Ironically, our kettles tend to not have these connectors anymore because kettles tend to be cordless. Well, I say cordless, you know, they have a sort of base thingy that does the interface so you don't have this bit to plug in and out. But this, which is often also called the IEC connector, it's a particular IEC standard, is a British mains cable, and I presume in the rest of the world you have this end, but then you'll have a different plug here. In Britain we have these particularly chunky plugs which have a fuse within them. You can buy expensive mains cables. I don't know why you would. As long as it connects and isn't really skinny gauge, you'll be fine. If it's a fused one in Britain, it needs to have a big enough fuse. This has a 3 amp fuse, which is too small for a powerful power amp. That will blow on the inrush or when you're playing loud. So, correct fuse. If you are connecting to a main socket that is fairly nearby, you do not need to worry about the thickness of this. If you are running a really long cable to the mains, then you have to stop worrying about that. That is a problem for sound engineers who are setting up gigs. It shouldn't be a problem for you, but if you are getting noise through your rig because of fluorescent lights, fridges and stuff like that on the same circuit, have a think about plugging in somewhere else if you can, because you might have annoying ground loops happening and things like that. So anyway, cables, mains cables, you can spend a lot of money on a mains cable. I don't know why you would. And also, generally shouldn't need power conditioners with properly designed gear. But sometimes you might if gear isn't properly designed. So, mains cables. Now to the more important ones that we're going to worry about. This is a speaker cable. This one happens to have a speak-on, 2-pole speak-on at one end. A 4-pole speak-on looks the same but has 4 connectors inside. 2-pole just has 2 connectors. 2 and 4-pole are interchangeable, but if you plug a 2-pole in, you'll only be connecting to 2 of the poles of a 4-pole socket. This is a big chunky 1/4-inch jack. I think these were originally designed for telephones, so there were switchboards back in the day, and they've sort of hung around for guitar use and not a lot else. We still have the odd pair of headphones that are on the big chunky jacks, but that's it. So what matters with cables? Well, there's a few things that matter and quite a lot of things that don't matter that people worry about unnecessarily and end up wasting money. So that's a speaker cable. The other cable is your guitar lead. So 1/4-inch jack on either end. I like right angle ones on a lot of instruments because they tuck out of the way more neatly. It's particularly annoying when you take an instrument off and put it down on the ground and lean it up against your amp if you're not using a stand, because I rarely do, and this thing gets bent and knackers your input jack. What matters? Durability. I think we can all agree that we don't want cables to break, and broken cables and cables breaking at critical moments is really irritating. Physical behaviour. I've noticed there's quite a resurgence of braided cables like this. I think it's because they're less annoying. They don't knot themselves up as easily. Yeah, they're just easier to handle than rubber covered cables, so that's quite a nice thing. That's really all I'm thinking about with physical characteristics. When it comes to durability, your big issue is this bit here where the cable goes from a rigid situation to flexing and the strain relief there. The most durable cables I've ever found are the whirlwind ones, with the straight whirlwind ones, because they have a massive long strain relief thing here and they seem to last forever. Their right angle ones I don't think have the big long strain relief, so as I prefer right angle jacks, I'm not generally using the whirlwind ones at the moment. These happen to be from studio spares, which were just sort of cheapish experiment, but the first ones broke. We resoldered them and they sent us some replacements as well. So yeah, hopefully the replacements have been properly made. They weren't strain relieved properly, the cable wasn't connected properly, so all the load was on the soldered connectors. So that's not really there for you to read, it so I don't forget things, because you can't see everything in a cable to remind you. Durability, physical behaviour, connectors. Monster cables used to have slightly oversized 1/4" jacks, so they made better connections, but it also meant they broke inputs, which was really irritating. But the connectors matter. We've had problems with people using fake speak-ons and them not being made to the tight standards that Triboelectric use for their real speak-ons, and then people being able to put them in upside down, so the wrong way around, because there's 2 tabs here, a thicker one and a thinner one. Sorry, a thicker one and a thinner one. And yeah, people managing to shove them in the wrong way, and I think we've actually had 1 or 2 broken backplates. I mean, that's not a terrible hit rate out of thousands and thousands of cabs, but yeah, fake speak-ons are not worth it. Get the real thing. They're not a lot of money, really, for what they are. They will last. Yeah, speak-ons are rather nice for amps. If you play guitar, you're probably thinking, what the hell is this doing on guitar stuff? Well, it works for PA stuff. It's become very much the standard for bass cabs. If you use one of these cables with your barefaced guitar cab, you can put that end into the amp, normal 1/4". You can put that end into the cab, or you could use one of those into the cab, because we use combi 1/4" speak-on sockets. But if you put this end into your cab, it will lock in place, and then when you're transporting it, you can tuck the whole cable inside the AVD chamber, and no one's going to steal it, because no other guitarists want to use 1/4" to speak on leads, because no guitar cabs other than ours that I know of have speak-on sockets on them. As I've said, ours have combi speak-on jacks, so you don't need to panic that you'll have to use one of these weird leads. You can use leads with these at both ends, that's absolutely fine. But I do like how these lock in, and then you can tuck it inside and transport it, and you won't forget your lead, and no one will steal it. Win. Triboelectric noise. That's a good word, isn't it? Triboelectric noise is the noise you get when a cable flexes and insulators and cable materials rub against each other, and essentially I think they're generating static within the cable, but it's that noise. It's very annoying. Bad cables do it, good cables don't. It matters. It particularly matters with passive guitars and basses that are quite low output. I don't know if you'd get triboelectric noise showing up with an active bass. You might, but it's definitely more of a passive instrument problem. But yeah, active instruments do make everything easier with cables. And then we're on to resistance and capacitance. Now, resistance, it doesn't really matter with cables like this. You're talking very small amounts of resistance. The cable runs, even if they're long, I mean, you might use a 30-foot cable, it's not a big deal. So don't worry about resistance. Cables like this, resistance matters with this if you're setting up a PA system in a big field and you've got big long runs of cable and you've got really high power amps and high power speakers, so you need big fat cables to basically mitigate resistive losses. And if the resistance is high, you're going to mess with the damping factor of the amp by basically screwing up the amp's output impedance by making the speaker see a higher output impedance from the amp, so the amp has less tight control of the speakers, so they don't stop and start as precisely. That's a non-issue for guitar cabs, because valve amps have very poor damping, and that's part of the sound of guitar. And bass, it's a non-issue because the cable runs just aren't long enough, so you don't need to worry about it. You do not need particularly fat cables with bass rigs, even with very high power ones, because the cables are short and it's the resistance that matters. So we're not worrying about the skinniness of it, we're worrying about if it's skinny and long, because then the resistance goes up. So yeah, resistance doesn't tend to matter within reason with speaker cables for bass cabs or guitar cabs. But yeah, it is an issue if you've got a big rack of power amps in one place and a long distance away a big pile of speakers. That's why the cables start to get really big and heavy, and that's, you know, one of the reasons why PA systems a lot of them use really big active speakers nowadays, because then you don't need to worry about these huge, heavy coils of copper cable, because they get really big. Capacitance. Now this is the thing that's a big deal, and this is the thing you will have heard. If you play a bass that's got single coil pickups, you know, it's passive, plenty of treble, or a guitar, pretty much any guitar that's got a good amount of treble, particularly if you like fresh strings using bridge pickups. If you use a very long cable, you will lose some highs. That's because the capacitance of the cable acts just like the capacitor that's connected to your tone control pot. So you've got a tone control pot, you twist, there's a cap there, and that bleeds highs away to ground. If I'm thinking correctly, yes, yeah, it bleeds highs to ground. And that's what the capacitance in your cable acts like. So it acts as a low pass filter cutting out highs. Some cables have more capacitance than others, but it's inevitable with a shielded cable, because you've got this outer coil, well, this outer sort of tube of cable that's shielding, and then you've got the core, and between the two of them, you've essentially got a capacitor running between them. So there's a lot of area. It causes a capacitance in the cable, and the longer the cable, the more capacitance there is, so the greater the low pass effect. If you are running a pedal board, then it's often prudent to have a buffer pedal at the start of the chain, because otherwise you'll have your board and your instrument will go into the board, and then cable, 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 and then another run off to the amp. So you end up with a lot of cable capacitance, and that's going to kill off your highs compared to if you plug straight into the amp with a 10-foot or 20-foot cable. Obviously, the longer the cables get, the worse the problem is. So what I would say to you about cable capacitance, figure it into your sound. You know, work out how much cable capacitance you can get away with. Work out how long a cable, you know, is manageable. And you may conclude that when you're recording, you want to use a 6-foot or a 10-foot cable. But for gigs, the loss of highs on a 30-foot cable isn't a big enough issue to worry about versus the pain of being tied so closely to your amp or your pedal board. I think that's everything I've got to say about cables. There is a lot of snake oil about cables. There are a lot of companies out there taking a lot of money off you for cables that you think sound better, but you wouldn't find actually sounded better if you did a blind A/B test or an ABY test, so using a comparator. So it's A or B, or it's A or B and you don't know which one it is. Those sort of tests tend to show up that cables, expensive cables, make no difference. Cables that don't work make a big difference. So I would say to you, do not buy cheap, nasty cables. Buy decent cables with decent components, decent leads. But if a cable feels too expensive, then it probably is too expensive. Don't buy cheap rubbish. Buy good cables that last. Like I said, those Whirlwind ones, if you like straight jacks, straight quarter-inch jacks like that, the Whirlwind ones go on forever. I don't know what they cost, 20 quid, 30 quid for a cable, but you'll probably have it in 20 or 30 years and it'll still be working if someone hasn't stolen it or you haven't lost it. So yeah, that's the most important thing about cables, that they last and that you don't lose them. I can't help you with the second part. Well, I can help you with not losing the guitar amp to cab cable by persuading you to buy a barefaced AVD cab with a locking one. But yeah, other than that, please keep track of your cables yourself. And if you've got any thoughts or experiences with cables, if you think I'm completely wrong about this, do tell me. It'd be interesting to have a sort of discussion and do a follow-up video to this, if you've had any experiences. Or if you thought the expensive cables you bought were better, and they sounded better, yeah, let's talk about that. If not, that's enough about cables from me for now. They're not very interesting. They are annoying. Why do they knot themselves up? But at least you don't have to remember batteries like with wireless, and there's more links to go wrong there. I've been Alex from Barefaced. I've been talking about cables. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.